The wind screamed across the snow-covered mountain top. It carried the faraway sound of Christmas bells from a village down in the valley below. "Help me?" Her voice broke apart in the storm. They had pushed her off the edge of the cliff. They thought a hurt female sniper would disappear into the winter night. No one looked back. No one thought she would live. But when the gunshot rang out, just one shot, cold and exact, the whole battlefield froze. That Christmas night, the one who should have been dead became the one who decided what would happen in the entire battle. The temperature gadget on Sarah Mitchell's wrist showed negative 18 degrees Celsius. Her breath turned to ice crystals in the air. Each time she breathed out, a small white cloud appeared and then vanished into the darkness. Above the front base, a string of battery-powered lights blinked red and green against the army tents made of thick cloth. It was a weak try at Christmas happiness that only made the war feel more ugly and wrong. Sarah moved her scope to look better at the valley below. Pine trees bent down under the weight of fresh snow. Somewhere in that darkness, enemy hiding spots waited. The radio inside the command tent made crackling sounds with static. Then Frank Sinatra's voice floated out, singing about chestnuts roasting on an open fire. "Ridiculous," said Sergeant Marcus Webb in an angry whisper, stomping his boots near the heater. "Playing Christmas songs while we're sitting on a powder keg." Sarah said nothing. She had learned that staying quiet was her best protection in this group. Captain Rodriguez came out from the tent. His breath was easy to see in the freezing air. He looked at Sarah's spot on the edge of the cliff, his face showing no emotion. Behind him, Lieutenant Danny Kovac whispered something that made Rodriguez frown. Sarah had been with this forward scouting group for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of proving herself. But still, she stayed on the outside edge. The men gathered around the heater, sharing coffee and stories. Sarah stayed at her post, eyes on the scope, fingers numb even with her gloves on. "Mitchell." Rodriguez's voice cut through the wind. "You're relieved. Patterson will take the watch." Sarah turned confused. "Sir, my shift isn't over for another." "I said you're relieved." His tone left no room for arguing. Private Jake Patterson jogged past her, carrying his rifle. He didn't look at her eyes. None of them did anymore. Not since the mission in the eastern sector. Sarah climbed down from her high spot. Her boots made crunching sounds in the snow. As she passed the heater, Sergeant Webb moved a little, blocking her from getting to the warmth. Lieutenant Kovac was telling a story about his daughter's first Christmas. His voice was lively and excited. The story stopped when Sarah came close. She walked afar into the camp where her gear sat in neat rows. Everything was organized and exact, the way her father had taught her before he died in the mountains of Afghanistan. Her rifle, a Remington M24, was cleaner than anyone else's in the unit. Her bullets were counted and counted again. Her position was always memorized. None of it mattered. Through the tent cloth, she heard Webb's voice get louder. "I'm telling you, Rodriguez, this is crazy. We can't trust her judgment. Not after what happened at Grid Echo 7. Sarah's jaw got tight. Grid Echo 7. The failed scouting mission. The mission they blamed on her. The wind picked up, howling across the mountaintop. The Christmas lights swayed back and forth, making strange shadows across the snow. Sarah checked her watch. 2,300 hours. Christmas Eve was turning into Christmas Day. She thought about her mother back in Montana, probably sitting by the fireplace, staring at Sarah's empty chair. 3 Christmases in a row now. Sarah had been sent away for duty. 3 Christmases of choosing her job over home. A sharp cracking sound echoed across the valley. Sarah's hand moved by habit to her rifle, but it was only ice breaking from a cliff edge. The men at the heater barely moved. They were comfortable. Too comfortable. Sarah studied the edge of the mountain, the way the snow had piled up, the patterns the wind made. Something felt wrong. The bells from the village had stopped. The night had become too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before violence. She walked toward the command tent. Captain Rodriguez. "Not now, Mitchell." "Sir, the valley is too quiet. I think you should follow orders." Rodriguez didn't look up from his map. "Get some rest. We have a long day tomorrow." Lieutenant Kovac smiled in a mean way from across the tent. Webb shook his head like Sarah was a child who didn't understand how war worked. Sarah walked away, anger burning in her chest. She had seen things they hadn't. Patterns, movement, but in their eyes, she was a problem, not the helper. The snow began to fall harder, thick flakes that made it hard to see. Sarah went back to her gear, checking her rifle one more time. The metal was cold enough to burn skin. She loaded a magazine. The mechanical click was satisfying in its sureness. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch snapped. The sound was wrong, too on purpose, too close. Sarah's instincts screamed at her, but when she looked toward the command tent, the men were laughing at something Kovac had said. She stood alone at the edge of the mountain, the outcast, the one they didn't trust, watching the darkness swallow the valley below, while Christmas songs played on, tiny and far away, a mockery of peace. The rejection hadn't started with Grid Echo 7. It had started the day Sarah arrived at Fort Bragg, the only woman in a sniper unit that had never wanted one. She remembered Captain Rodriguez's face during the meeting, the way his expression had gotten tight when she walked into the room. Mitchell, he had said, reading from her file, top marks in shooting, excellent field reviews, recommended by Colonel Brennan himself. But his tone suggested that recommendations meant nothing here. The men had tested her right away. Sergeant Webb accidentally gave her wrong coordinates during her first training exercise. Lieutenant Kovac questioned every calculation she made, every wind adjustment, every distance guess. Private Patterson, the youngest of the group, simply ignored her, as if admitting she existed would somehow make him dirty. Sarah had put up with it all with silence. She outshot them at the practice range. She memorized land features faster. She took care of her equipment with obsessive care. None of it mattered. They had decided before she arrived that she didn't belong. Grid Echo 7 had been the breaking point. The mission was supposed to be simple. Scouting. Watch enemy supply routes through a mountain pass. Report back. Get out. Sarah had been placed on lookout, providing cover while Webb and Kovac moved through the valley. She had seen the trap before it happened. The way the shadows move wrong. The shine of metal where there should have been none. She had radioed the warning. Hold position. Something's wrong. Webb had ignored her. We're 30 meters from the target. We're going in. Sergeant, I have eyes on possible. Mitchell, stay quiet on the radio unless you have targets you're sure about. She had watched through her scope as Webb and Kovac walked into the trap, watched as the enemy closed in. She had taken the shots, 3 confirmed kills that let them escape, but in the confusion, important documents were lost. Critical information about supply routes burned when Webb threw a special grenade to cover their retreat. Back at base, Rodriguez had been furious. That information was vital, Mitchell. Sir, I warned them about the ambush. You spooked them with ghosts. Webb says you panicked, started seeing threats that weren't there. That's not true. I saw. What you saw, Rodriguez interrupted, was a chance to play a hero, and it cost us the mission. Webb and Kovac had stood behind the captain, their faces showing nothing. They hadn't disagreed with the story. They had let Sarah take the blame. Now, standing on the Christmas mountain, Sarah felt the weight of that unfairness like ice in her lungs. She had saved their lives, and they had paid her back with lies. The tent flap opened. Sergeant Webb came out, his face hard. He walked toward Sarah with slow, deliberate steps, his boots leaving deep prints in the fresh snow. Mitchell, his voice was flat. The captain wanted to talk to you. Sarah followed him to the command tent. Inside, Rodriguez sat with maps spread across the table. Lieutenant Kovac stood in the corner, arms crossed. Mitchell, Rodriguez began, not looking up. I'm reassigning you. Sarah's stomach dropped. Sir, you'll be moving to the secondary watching post 2 kilometers east. Patterson will take your position here. Captain, the secondary post is isolated. If something happens, Rodriguez said, finally looking at her eyes, you'll report it. That's all. Watching only. No fighting without direct permission from me. Understood? Sir, I don't understand why. Because I don't trust your judgment, Mitchell. The words were cold. Final. You see threats everywhere. You mess up security with your paranoia. The team needs someone reliable, not someone who shoots at shadows. I saved their lives at Echo 7. Webb's face turned red. You nearly got us killed. We had the situation under control until you started shooting. You walked into an ambush. Enough. Rodriguez stood up. Mitchell, you're dismissed. Pack your gear. Transport leaves at 0600. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to scream the truth, but she saw it in their faces. They had decided. Nothing she said would change their minds. She turned and walked out into the snow. Behind her, she heard Kovac laugh. Good riddance. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of pine trees and smoke. Sarah packed her gear with shaking hands, anger and embarrassment burning her throat. They were sending her away, keeping her separate, making her invisible. She thought about her father, about the stories he told of his own battles, the times when doing the right thing meant standing alone. The shot matters, he had always said, not who takes credit for it. Sarah finished packing. She checked her rifle one final time, running her hand along the barrel. Whatever they thought of her, she was still a soldier. She would still do her duty, even if they never saw it. The argument blew up at 0300 hours, when the wind was strongest and the snow fell like a curtain. Sarah had stayed at her position despite the reassignment, unable to sleep, watching the valley with growing worry. She had seen movements, subtle, professional, the kind that only trained eyes would catch. Enemy scouts, testing their defenses. She had reported it to Rodriguez, who dismissed it right away. Get off the radio, Mitchell. You're seeing ghosts again. Captain, I have confirmed movement at grid Delta 4. Multiple contacts moving in formation. God darn it, Mitchell. Rodriguez's voice crackled with fury. I told you watching only. Stop wasting radio time with your paranoid fantasies. They're real, sir. If we don't strengthen the western side, one more word, and I'll have you court-martialed for not following orders. The radio went dead. Sarah stared at her scope, watching the shadows move with deadly precision. They were real. She knew they were real. But no one would listen. She grabbed her rifle and headed toward the command tent, determined to make Rodriguez see the truth. The snow was thick now, visibility down to just meters. She had to squint to see the lights ahead. Sergeant Webb stopped her halfway there. Where the heck do you think you're going? I need to talk to the captain. There's enemy movement in the valley. There's nothing in that valley except your imagination. Webb's face was inches from hers, his breath hot with coffee and anger. You just can't let it go, can you? Can't accept that maybe, just maybe, you're not the expert you think you are. I know what I saw. You don't know anything. Lieutenant Kovac appeared from the darkness, coming up beside her. You're a liability, Mitchell. A danger to this whole unit. Sarah's hand tightened on her rifle. Get out of my way. Or what? Kovac's smile was cruel. You'll shoot us? Add mutiny to your list of failures. More men came out of the snow. Patterson, Corporal Hayes, Private Rodriguez. They form a half circle around Sarah, their faces hard in the dim light. We've been talking, Webb said quietly. The captain doesn't know it yet, but he will. You're not just going to the secondary post. You're going home. We're filing a formal complaint. Psychiatric concerns. You're unstable, Mitchell. Dangerous. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. You're lying about me again. We're protecting this unit from you, Kovac said. Something we should have done after Echo 7. The wind howled, drowning out the Christmas songs from the tent. Sarah looked at their faces, saw the belief there. They believed their own lies. They had rewritten history until she was a bad guy, until her skill became paranoia, her warnings became craziness. Get away from the ridge, Mitchell, Webb ordered. Now, before you do something we'll all regret. Sarah took a step back, her boot finding the edge of the path. The ground was unsteady here, a narrow trail along a steep slope. One wrong move, and the drop was 30 meters onto rocks and ice. I said move. Webb shoved her shoulder. Sarah stumbled, her foot slipping. She reached out, grabbing for Webb's jacket, but Kovac was there, pushing her hand away. Don't touch him, Kovac said, and push her backward. Time slowed down. Sarah felt her weight shift, felt the ground disappear beneath her boots. She reached the ridge, fingers scraping rock, but the ice gave no grip. Help me? The words tore from her throat as she fell. She heard Kovac's voice, distant and fading. Jesus Christ. Then there was only the rush of air, the sickening hits against rock and snow, the world tumbling over and over. Her shoulder hit first, then her ribs, then her leg. Pain exploded in white bursts behind her eyes. She rolled, slid, bounced off a rock sticking out. Her rifle strap caught on something, jerking her to a stop. She hung, suspended for a moment, then the strap broke, and she was falling again. The final hit drove the air from her lungs. She lay in a crack of rock and snow, unable to move, unable to breathe, staring up at the ridge where the Christmas lights blinked red and green through the storm. Voices drifted down. Can't see her. Probably dead. Don't say anything. Tell Rodriguez she wandered off. The voices faded. The lights disappeared. The snow continued to fall, covering Sarah like a burial cloth. She was alone, abandoned, left to die on Christmas morning, and no one was coming back for her. Sarah's first thought when she woke up was simple: breathe. Her lungs wouldn't obey. The impact had crushed the air from her chest, leaving her gasping like a fish on ice. She forced her stomach muscle to work, dragged in one painful breath, then another. Each inhale felt like broken glass cutting her ribs. The crack where she had landed was narrow, barely wide enough for her body. Rock walls rose on either side, slick with ice. Above, the ridge was invisible, swallowed by snow and darkness. Her watch showed 045 hours. She had been knocked out for over an hour. Sarah tried to move her right leg. White-hot pain shot through her ankle, broken or badly twisted. Either way, she wouldn't be walking. Her left arm responded. She felt along her body for injuries. Ribs bruised but not broken. Head okay, though a warm stream of blood ran down from her hairline. Shoulder out of place. She had fallen 30 meters and survived. The snow had softened some of the impact, and luck, or something darker, had guided her into this crack instead of onto the rocks below. Sarah reached for her radio. Gone, torn from her vest during the fall. She checked for her rifle. It lay 3 meters away, partly buried in snow. She pulled herself toward it, using her good arm, dragging her injured leg. Each movement was torture. Each meter took minutes. When she finally reached the rifle, she sobbed with relief. The weapon was okay. The scope had survived. She had bullets. Sarah wedged herself into a sitting position against the rock wall. Her warm gear was torn, and the cold was already seeping into her bones. Freezing to death would kill her faster than the injuries. She pulled her emergency blanket from her vest, wrapped it around her shoulders, and huddled into the smallest space possible to keep heat. Don't sleep. If you sleep, you die. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. She was 9 years old, lost with him in a Montana snowstorm when their truck broke down. He had kept her awake all night with stories, with songs. Would anything prevent her from giving in to the cold? Tell me about Christmas, Dad, she whispered to the darkness. Her voice was small, childlike. She remembered the Christmas before he left for the last time. They had gone hunting together, just the two of them, in the mountains. He had taught her about wind patterns, about how cold air affects where bullets go, about patience and being exact. A good shot, he said, is 90% getting ready, 10% doing it. You do the work before you pull the trigger. Sarah checked her rifle with numb fingers. The bolt moved smoothly. The scope was set right. She counted her ammunition. 18 rounds. 18 chances. For what? She didn't know. She only knew that getting ready was how you stayed alive. The cold got worse. Sarah's teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasting blood. She tucked her hands under her armpits, but the feeling was leaving her fingers. She couldn't stop shaking. Think. Focus. Stay awake. She forced herself to look around her spot. The crack was about 4 meters deep, protected from the wind, but also invisible from above. No one would find her here. Even if they searched, which they wouldn't, the snow would cover all signs of her fall. Sarah looked out from her shelter. Through the gap in the rocks, she had a clear view of the valley below, the same valley she had been watching from the ridge. From this angle, she could see land that had been invisible from above, dead space where enemy forces could move without being seen. And there, in the darkness before dawn, she saw them. 20, maybe 30 figures moving through the trees. Professional, coordinated, heading straight toward the forward base. The ambush she had warned about. The threat Rodriguez had dismissed. Sarah tried to stand, gasping as pain shot through her leg. She collapsed back against the rock. She had no radio, no way to warn them. The unit on the ridge was about to be killed, and there was nothing she could do except watch them die. No, the word rose from somewhere deep, somewhere that refused to give up. Her father's voice again. You're a Mitchell. We don't quit. We don't hide. We take the shot. Sarah checked her rifle again. The distance to the valley floor was roughly 400 meters. Extreme range, especially with wind, cold, and her own injuries, but possible. She remembered every lesson her father had taught her. She remembered the hours of the range, the endless practice, the devotion to her craft. She remembered why she had become a sniper, not for glory, not for revenge, but because someone had to stand between the innocent and the darkness. Even if that someone was broken, bleeding, and abandoned in a frozen crack in the mountain. Even if no one would ever know. Sarah positioned her rifle, bracing it against a rock. Her hands shook from cold and shock, but muscle memory took over. She calculated wind, height, temperature. The math was automatic, burned into her mind. She settled in to wait, to watch, to prepare. And when the moment came, if it came, she would take the shot. Because that's what snipers do. That's what Mitchells do. They take the shot that saves lives, even when everyone has given up on them. Especially then. The attack came at dawn, just as the sky began to lighten from black to gray. Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy forces split into 3 groups. Professional tactics. One group to go around from the west, one to come up from the valley, one to climb the eastern slope. Captain Rodriguez and his men were surrounded before they knew they were being attacked. The first explosion tore through the communications tent, sending pieces and flame into the morning air. The sound echoed across the valley, followed right away by automatic weapons fire. Through her scope, Sarah saw the forward base erupt into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons, diving behind barriers that had been set up for show, not actual defense. They had been so sure about their position, so certain that Sarah's warnings were paranoid nonsense. Now, they were paying for their pride. Captain Rodriguez came out from his tent, shouting orders Sarah couldn't hear. Sergeant Webb took a position behind the heating unit, firing in controlled bursts. Lieutenant Kovac was trying to organize a defense on the eastern slope, but the enemy was already above them, firing down. Sarah watched Private Patterson get hit, spinning backward into the snow. Corporal Hayes dragged him behind cover, returning fire without aiming. The battle situation was clear to Sarah, clearer than it would be to anyone on the ridge. From her position, she could see the entire battlefield. She could see how the enemy was moving, where they were strongest, where they were weak. The enemy commander was setting up a heavy machine gun on a rock sticking out, 360 meters from Sarah's position. Once that weapon was ready, it would have clear shooting lines to the entire ridge. The Americans would be slaughtered. Sarah shifted her rifle, ignoring the screaming pain in her leg. Her fingers were so numb she could barely feel the trigger. She tucked her hands under her arms for 30 seconds, forcing blood back into them. Come on, work. I need you to work. The machine gun crew was setting up the stand. 2 men working fast and well. They would be ready in less than a minute. Sarah checked her ammunition. 17 rounds left. She had to make every shot count. Her hands were steadier now, warmed a little by her body heat. She pressed her eye to the scope, adjusting for distance and wind. The wind, it was the most important thing. At this range, even a small mistake would send the bullet meters off target. Sarah watched the snow patterns. The way flags moved on the enemy position. The bend of the few trees, still standing. 8.3 meters per hour from the northwest. Adjust 3 clicks right. Her father's voice. Breathe. Wait for the pause between heartbeats. That's when you're still. Sarah inhaled slowly. Exhaled. Found the space between breaths where the body became perfectly motionless. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The sound was huge in the tight space of the crack, echoing off the rock walls. Through the scope, she saw the machine gunner's head snap back. He crumpled across the weapon. The second crew member froze, looking around in confusion. Where had the shot come from? Not from the ridge. Those men were pinned down. From the valley? Impossible at this angle. Sarah had already loaded another round. She adjusted 1 click left. The first shot had pulled slightly right in the wind. She found her stillness again. Fired. The second man fell. The machine gun sat unmanned on its stand, useless. On the ridge, the Americans were too busy fighting for their lives to notice. But the enemy had noticed. Officers were shouting, pointing, trying to find the sniper. Sarah smiled grimly. Good luck. She was a ghost, a phantom firing from a position that didn't exist. She looked for the next target. The enemy was regrouping on the western side, getting ready to rush the command tent. 8 men moving in pairs. Their leader was a tall man in winter camouflage, directing the attack with hand signals. 420 meters. Uphill shot. Wind still steady at 8.3. Sarah adjusted her scope, found the leader, breathed, waited, fired. The man dropped. His squad scattered, diving for cover. Now the enemy knew someone was out there, picking them off with exactness. Their attack slowed down as they searched for threats that seemed to come from nowhere. Sarah kept firing. She was organized, calculating, choosing targets that would cause the most confusion. She hit their communications specialist, their medic, an officer trying to gather his men. Each shot was perfect. Each shot saved lives on the ridge. But Sarah was fading. The cold was getting deeper, seeping into her core. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. She had maybe 5 more shots before the freezing cold took away the fine control she needed. 5 shots. Make them count. The enemy was pulling back, regrouping behind cover. Sarah could see them getting ready for another attack. They would come from a different angle this time, learn from their mistakes. Through the scope, she saw Captain Rodriguez trying to organize a defense. He was brave, she'd give him that, but he couldn't see what Sarah could see. The enemy group going around to the trees to the north, getting ready to strike from the blind side. Sarah shifted her rifle, tracking the flanking unit. 12 men moving fast. If they finished their move, the battle was over. She took aim at the lead scout. Distance 390 meters. Difficult shot through tree branches and wind. She calculated trajectory, breath, heart rhythm. The shot hit true. The scout fell. The flanking force stopped, confused and exposed. Sarah loaded another round, already picking her next target. She was a machine now, mechanical and precise, driven by training and willpower. She was broken, bleeding, and abandoned, but she was still a soldier. And soldiers don't quit. The battle had reached a turning point. The enemy, confused and without leaders, was regrouping for one final attack. The Americans on the ridge were running low on ammunition. Their defensive positions were falling apart. Sarah had 3 rounds left in her magazine. 3 chances to change everything. Her entire body was numb now. She couldn't feel her toes. Her fingers worked on autopilot. Mechanical movements burned into muscle memory through thousands of hours of practice. Her vision narrowed to the small circle of her scope. The rest of the world faded into gray fuzz. She thought about Christmas morning, about her mother waking up in Montana to an empty house, about the traditions they would never share again, about all the choices that led Sarah to this moment. Dying alone in a frozen crack, fighting for people who betrayed her. Was it worth it? Through the scope, she saw Lieutenant Kovac taking fire, pinned behind a barrier. The same man who had pushed her off the ridge. The same man who had lied about her. In that moment, Sarah could have let him die. Simple to do, justice of a sort. Instead, she tracked the enemy's soldier moving to go around him. 440 meters. Wind gusting. She adjusted, breathed, fired. The enemy dropped. Kovac lived, never knowing who had saved him. Sarah smiled bitterly. Merry Christmas, she whispered. 2 rounds left. The enemy commander had finally appeared, directing his forces from a position near the destroyed communications tent. He was trying to gather his troops for one last push. If he succeeded, if he managed to organize the scattered units, the ridge would fall. Sarah studied him through her scope. 500 meters, beyond the effective range of most snipers in these conditions. The wind was unpredictable, gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour. Her hands were shaking without control from cold and blood loss. This was the shot her father had described, the impossible shot, the one where preparation met opportunity, where skill rose above circumstances. She ran the calculations: wind, temperature, altitude, the slight lean of her rifle against the rock, the curve of the earth itself at this distance. 100 things that could change the result, any one of which could send the bullet wide. Sarah closed her eyes, centering herself. She thought about her father in the mountains, teaching her to read the wind by the way snow danced across the ground. She thought about her first deer at age 12, the patience it had taken to wait for the perfect moment. She thought about every lesson, every hour of practice, every sacrifice that had brought her to this instant. When she opened her eyes, the world was crystal clear. The shaking stopped. Her breathing settled. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell, the rejected soldier dying in a crack in the rock. She was something purer, an instrument of precision, a coming together of skill and necessity. She found the enemy commander in her scope, adjusted for distance, wind, the Earth's rotation. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. She whispered, "Sorry, but I'm still here." The rifle fired. For a moment, the world held its breath. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the valley, sharp and final. Snow swirled. Wind howled. Then, through her scope, Sarah saw the enemy commander fall backward, a red stain spreading across the snow. The battlefield went silent. The enemy's soldiers froze, staring at their fallen leader. The Americans on the ridge stopped firing, confused by the sudden stopping of the attack. Through the scope, Sarah watched the enemy's determination crumble. Their commander was dead. Their attack had failed. Men began retreating, first in ones and twos, then in a rush. They disappeared into the forest, leaving behind their wounded, their equipment, their mission. On the ridge, Captain Rodriguez came out from cover, looking at the valley with binoculars, trying to understand what had just happened. Sergeant Webb was shouting orders, making the area secure. Lieutenant Kovac stood motionless, staring at the dead enemy commander, figuring out the impossible angle of the shot. Sarah lowered her rifle. One round left. She wouldn't need it now. The battle was over. The ridge was saved, and she had done it alone. Sarah leaned back against the rock wall, letting the rifle rest across her lap. The adrenaline was fading, and with it, the last of her strength. The cold was complete now, seeping into her bones, turning her blood to ice. She looked up at the sky. The storm was passing. Between the clouds, she caught a glimpse of stars fading in the dawn light. Christmas morning. Somewhere, people were opening presents, drinking hot cocoa, celebrating life. Sarah closed her eyes. She had done her duty. She had saved her unit despite everything they had done to her. Her father would have been proud. "I took the shot, Dad," she whispered. "I took the shot." The darkness came softly then, like sleep, like peace. And Christmas morning was silent on the frozen ridge. The silence lasted exactly 47 seconds before chaos erupted again. "Sniper!" someone yelled on the ridge. "We got friendlies in the valley." Sarah's eyes snapped open. Through the fog of freezing cold, she heard voices crackling over radios, orders being shouted, confusion spreading through the unit. Captain Rodriguez's voice boomed across the ridge. "Patterson, Hayes, Kovac, fan out. Find our people." Our people? They thought Allied forces had arrived. They didn't understand yet. Sarah's hand moved to her rifle. She had to tell them, had to explain, but her fingers wouldn't respond. Her lips were frozen, unable to form words. She was disappearing into the cold, becoming part of the mountain. "Move. You have to move." She dragged her body forward, inch by agonizing inch, until she was at the edge of a crack in the rocks. Above, the ridge remained invisible in the swirling snow. Below, the valley was a graveyard of enemy bodies, each one marking her perfect shots. A radio crackled somewhere. One of the enemies dropped devices. Still working. Sarah pulled herself toward it. Her progress was measured in heartbeats and pain. When she finally reached it, she fumbled with numb fingers at the frequency dial. American tactical frequencies. She had them memorized. She managed to turn the device on. Voices flooded through. Searching grid echo for. Negative on contacts. Where the heck did they go? Sarah's lips moved, but no sound came. She tried again, forcing air through her frozen throat. Here. The word was barely a whisper, lost in the wind. An enemy soldier stirred 5 meters from her position. Wounded but alive. He reached for his rifle, his eyes finding Sarah's position. Time slowed down. Sarah's hand moved to her weapon, but she was too weak, too slow. The enemy raised his rifle. A shot rang out from the ridge. Sergeant Webb's distinctive 3-round burst. The enemy's soldier collapsed. Contact. I've got contact in the valley. Webb's voice echoed across the snow. Sarah used the last of her strength to press the radio button. Don't shoot. Static. Then Webb's voice, uncertain. Who said that? Identify yourself. Mitchell. Her name came out as a rasp, barely human. Sarah Mitchell. The radio went silent for a long moment. Then Captain Rodriguez's voice, sharp with disbelief. Mitchell? That's impossible. You're alive? Sarah laughed, the sound turning into a cough that brought blood to her lips. Grid Delta 3? Crevice can't move. Jesus Christ. She heard Kovac whisper. Rodriguez again. Mitchell, stay put. We're coming to you. Do you copy? Roger. Sarah let the radio fall from her hand. She had done enough, said enough. Now they knew. But she wasn't done yet. Through the scope, she tracked movement on the eastern ridge. 3 enemy soldiers, cut off from their retreating force, trying to circle behind the American position. They were hidden in a fold of ground, invisible to everyone except Sarah. She had 1 round left. Sarah positioned her rifle, fighting to keep her vision clear. The scope swam in and out of focus. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the weapon steady. 3 targets, 1 bullet. Impossible math. Unless she tracked the lead soldier until he passed behind a fuel drum abandoned by the enemy, the kind of drum that held diesel for their generators. She could see the fumes rising from a crack in the metal where a bullet had poked a hole in it earlier. Sarah adjusted her aim, not at the soldier, at the drum. 530 meters. Wind at 9 miles per hour. Frozen air making the bullet drop faster. She had to calculate for how the bullet would bounce. The explosive force. The flying metal pieces. 1 shot. Last chance. Sarah's father's final words to her before his last deployment echoed in her mind. Sometimes the impossible shot is the only shot worth taking. She fired. The bullet struck the drum at exactly the right angle. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the diesel caught fire, not an explosion, but a rapid burning that wrapped the 3 enemy soldiers in flame. They stumbled from their cover, burning, screaming, no longer a threat. On the ridge, every American soldier turned toward the source of that single gunshot. They traced a path back, into an impossible position far below. My God, someone whispered. She's been shooting this whole time. Sarah's rifle slipped from her hands. Empty now, all ammunition used up. She had nothing left to give. She slumped against the rock wall, watching the sky lighten with dawn. The storm was passing. Rays of sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow to diamonds. Beautiful. It's all so beautiful. Voices called her name from above. Ropes appeared, dropped from the ridge. Men were coming. Webb, Hayes, Patterson. They were climbing down to her position, moving with frantic urgency. Sarah smiled. Too late. Too cold. She was already somewhere else. Somewhere warm where her father waited. Where Christmas mornings lasted forever. Mitchell. Sarah, stay with us. Hands on her. Blankets. Heat packs. Someone cutting away her frozen clothing. Checking her vital signs. Sergeant Webb's face appeared above hers. His expression twisted with something between horror and awe. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Sarah tried to respond, but darkness was claiming her again. The last thing she heard was the distant sound of helicopter blades cutting through the Christmas morning air. They had come for her, after all. Better late than never. The helicopter reached them at 0730 hours. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as hands lifted her onto the stretcher, as the medics started in 4, as the helicopter rose into the gray dawn sky. Pieces of conversation got through the fog. Core temperature 89 degrees. Multiple fractures. Severe hypothermia. How did she even survive this long? Through blurred vision, Sarah saw Captain Rodriguez sitting across from her in the helicopter. His face was gray with shock. He held her rifle, the Remington M24 that had saved his entire unit. 17 confirmed kills, the medic said, counting the shell casings the team had recovered from Sarah's position. 17 perfect shots at extreme range in impossible conditions. I've never seen anything like it. Rodriguez touched the rifle like it was holy. Neither have I. Sarah tried to focus on his face, tried to see past the exhaustion and guilt to the man underneath. He met her eyes. You saved us, he said quietly. After everything we did to you, you saved us. Sarah wanted to say something meaningful, something that would make him understand the cause of his disbelief, but she was too tired, too cold, and the words wouldn't come. Lieutenant Kovac appeared in the corner of her vision, his usual arrogance gone. The enemy commander, he said, his voice rough. That final shot, 500 meters in high wind. That's not possible. She made it possible, Sergeant Webb said. He sat beside Sarah's stretcher, his head in his hands. Jesus, Mitchell, we left you to die. We pushed you off that ridge and walked away. Sarah found her voice, a whisper barely heard over the helicopter noise. I know. The 3-word hung in the air, heavy with accusation and truth. I'm filing a formal report, Rodriguez said, his voice hard now, directed at Kovac and Webb. A full investigation into what happened on that ridge. You two pushed a fellow soldier to her death. That's attempted murder. Captain, we didn't mean, Kovac started. You didn't mean to push her off a cliff, or you didn't mean for her to survive to tell about it. Kovac's face went white. Webb said nothing, staring at his hands. The medic interrupted. Sir, she's crashing. Blood pressure dropping. Heart rate irregular. We need to land now. The pilot's voice crackled through the comm. 2 minutes to field hospital. Hang on. Sarah felt her consciousness slipping. She fought to stay present, to witness this moment, but the darkness was patient and strong. Her last thought before the void claimed her was simple, I did my duty. The rest doesn't matter. Sarah woke in a white room that smelled of cleaning chemicals and pine needles. Sunlight streamed through a window, blindingly bright, and 4 dripped clear fluid into her arm. Her leg was wrapped in a cast, raised up on pillows. Her ribs were taped. Her shoulder was held still. She was alive. A nurse noticed her eyes opening and smiled. Welcome back, Sergeant Mitchell. You gave us quite a scare. How long? Sarah's voice was rough from not being used. 3 days. You had severe hypothermia, a broken ankle, dislocated shoulder, fractured ribs, and about a dozen other injuries. The doctor said it's a miracle you survived. Not a miracle, Sarah murmured. Stubbornness. The nurse laughed. Well, whatever it was, you're a hero. The whole base is talking about what you did on that ridge. Hero. The word felt strange. Sarah had never thought of herself that way. She had simply done her job, taken the shots that needed taking. That's what snipers did. The door opened and Colonel Brennan entered, the officer who had originally recommended Sarah for unit. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too much war. Sergeant Mitchell. He pulled up a chair beside her bed. How are you feeling? Like I fell off a mountain, sir. Brennan smiled grimly. That's because you did. I've read the reports. All of them, including the one Sergeant Webb and Lieutenant Kovac tried to hide. Sarah's chest tightened. Sir, they're being court-martialed, both of them, along with formal warnings for Captain Rodriguez for creating a hostile environment. What happened on that ridge? He shook his head. It was inexcusable. They were afraid, Sarah said quietly. Afraid I'd get them killed. They weren't entirely wrong. I did mess up Echo 7. No. Brennan's voice was firm. You saved Echo 7. I've reviewed the mission footage from Patterson's helmet camera. You identified the ambush, provided covering fire, and enabled the escape. Webb and Kovac lied in their reports because they couldn't accept that you were right and they were wrong. Sarah took this in. 3 months of guilt, of second-guessing herself, of wondering if maybe she was a problem. It all fell apart in the face of the truth. The enemy forces you fought on Christmas morning, Brennan continued, were part of a major offensive. If they'd taken that ridge, they would have had a clear route to our supply lines. Your actions didn't just save your unit. You prevented a strategic disaster. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Sergeant. You were doing everyone's job, alone while injured after being betrayed by your own team. Brennan leaned forward. The military doesn't always get things right, Mitchell. We're made up of flawed people making difficult decisions. But sometimes, rarely, we get the chance to correct our mistakes. He pulled out a small box from his jacket. The Army wants to award you the Silver Star for bravery. Personally, I think you deserve the Medal of Honor, but the paperwork moves slowly. Sarah stared at the box. Awards, medals, recognition. It should have felt like being proven right, like justice. Instead, it felt hollow. What I want, she said slowly, is for them to believe me next time, to trust my judgment, to see me as a soldier, not a liability. They will, Brennan promised. They'll have no choice. Your story is going to be told, Mitchell, not just to this unit, but to the entire armed forces. You're going to be a case study in sniper tactics, in survival skills, in what it means to place mission above personal hurt. Sarah closed her eyes. She didn't want to be a case study. She wanted to be left alone, to do her job in peace, to prove her worth through quiet skill rather than dramatic sacrifice. But she understood that choice was no longer hers. She had become something larger than herself, a symbol, a lesson, a story that would be told and retold in training rooms and barracks for years to come. There's someone outside who wants to see you, Brennan said, standing, if you're up for it. Who? Private Patterson. He's been waiting since you arrived. Says he owes you an apology. Sarah nodded slowly. Send him in. Patterson entered nervously, his young face lined with guilt and lack of sleep. He stood at attention beside her bed, unable to meet her eyes. Sergeant Mitchell, he swallowed hard. I was there when they pushed you. I didn't stop them. I didn't say anything. I just watched you fall. And then his voice broke. I walked away. I pretended you were already dead because it was easier than admitting what we'd done. Sarah studied him. He was 22, barely more than a kid, following a lead of men he thought he should respect. You were scared, she said. It's hard to stand alone. That's no excuse. You stood alone against an entire enemy force after we'd left you to die. Tears streaked down his face. You saved my life on that ridge. I saw it through my scope. An enemy soldier had me in his sights, and then he just dropped. You were down there freezing to death, and you were still protecting us. It's what we do, Patterson. We protect each other, even when we don't deserve it. I'll testify at the court-martial, he said firmly. I'll tell them everything I saw, what Webb and Kovac did, how Rodriguez ignored your warnings, all of it. Good. Sarah's voice was gentle. But do it because it's right, not because of me. Do it so the next soldier doesn't have to prove themselves by surviving the impossible. Patterson nodded, wiping his eyes. Thank you, Sergeant, for everything. After he left, Sarah lay alone in the white room, watching the sunlight move across the walls. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the base, vehicles moving, voices calling, the ordinary rhythm of military life. She had survived. She had won. She had proven every doubter wrong. But the cost had been enormous, and part of her wondered if she would ever truly recover from the knowledge that the people she trusted had been willing to let her die. 2 weeks after the battle, Sarah was cleared to return to limited duty. She walked with a cane, her ankle still healing, but the doctor said she would make a full recovery. The forward base had been rebuilt, new command tents, reinforced positions, better communication equipment. Captain Rodriguez was gone, reassigned while waiting for the investigation. A new commander had taken over, Captain Lisa Morrison, a veteran of 3 deployments, who greeted Sarah with a firm handshake and direct eye contact. I've heard a lot about you, Mitchell, Morrison said. All good things. I run a unit based on skill and performance, not politics. You have a place here for as long as you want it. Sarah nodded, surprised by the relief she felt. Thank you, sir. It was Christmas Eve again, exactly 1 year after battle. The unit had put up a small tree in the common area, decorated with lights and handmade ornaments. Someone had found a speaker that played carols, the same Frank Sinatra songs that had been playing the night Sarah fell. She stood at the ridge, at the exact spot where Webb and Kovac had pushed her. The drop looked even more terrifying in daylight. It was amazing that she had survived. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. Sergeant Webb approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance. He looked older, haunted. The court-martial had resulted in a lower rank and reassignment, but not prison time. The military justice system had shown mercy, if not full forgiveness. I don't expect you to accept my apology, Webb said quietly. I don't think I'd accept it either in your place. But I need to say it anyway. I was wrong about you, about that night, about everything. Sarah didn't turn to look at him. Why? She asked. Why did you hate me so much? Webb was silent for a long moment. I didn't hate you. I was afraid of you. Afraid that if a woman could do our job better than we could, it meant we weren't as special as we thought we were. It's stupid, pathetic, but it's the truth. Fear makes people dangerous, Sarah said. I learned that on this ridge. I know, and I'll live with that knowledge every day for the rest of my life. Webb paused. The shot you took to save Kovac, when you could have let him die. That's the shot I think about most. The one that shows who you really are. Sarah finally turned to face him. His eyes were red, his expression raw with genuine remorse. We're not friends, Webb. We'll never be friends. But we're soldiers in the same army, fighting the same war. I can work with that. Webb nodded slowly. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. After he left, Sarah stood alone on the ridge, watching the sun set over the valley. The snow had returned, gentle flakes drifting down like memories. Somewhere below, in that crack of rock and ice, she had died and been reborn, not as a different person, but as a truer version of herself. Her radio crackled. Private Patterson's voice. Sergeant Mitchell, we're about to cut the cake. You coming? Sarah smiled. On my way. She walked back to the camp, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the frozen ground. Inside the common tent, the unit gathered around a small cake someone had baked using MRE ingredients and creativity. It looked terrible and probably tasted worse, but it was theirs, and it was Christmas. Morrison raised a paper cup of coffee. A toast, she said, to absent friends and second chances, to the lessons we learned the hard way, and to Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, who taught us all what it means to be a soldier. To Mitchell, the unit echoed. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but didn't let them fall. She raised her own cup, meeting the eyes of her teammates, people who respected her now, who valued her judgment, who had learned through tragedy the cost of prejudice and pride. To all of us, she said, may we do better tomorrow than we did today. They drank together. Someone turned up the carols, and for a moment, the war felt very far away. They were just people gathered on a snowy mountaintop, celebrating survival and hope and the small miracles of human connection. Later that night, Sarah returned to her quarters and pulled out a worn photograph. Her father in his uniform, standing in the Montana mountains, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked young and strong and impossibly alive. She touched the glass, covering his face. I took the shot, Dad, she whispered. All of them. I didn't quit. I didn't hide. The photograph didn't answer, but Sarah felt his presence anyway, felt his approval, in the quiet of her heart. Outside, the Christmas bells began to ring from the village in the valley below. The same bells that had been playing when she fell. The same bells that had witnessed her being saved. Sarah closed her eyes and listened. Each chime was a promise that courage mattered, that truth won in the end, that even in the darkest cold, the human spirit burned bright and could never be put out. She had survived the fall. She had survived the cold. She had survived her own side betrayal. And she had come out not bitter, but stronger, not wanting revenge, but wiser, not broken, but made better by fire and ice into something that would never again question its own worth. The bells rang on into the Christmas night, carrying their message across the frozen mountains. Hope lasts forever. Truth wins in the end. The shot matters.